Yeah, I just want to welcome everyone to this Teaching Tip Live. I'm Chris Lott. I'm with the Office of Digital Learning at UW-Tacoma. Today, my job is pretty simple because I have two great experts here with Erika Bailey and Marisa. I was going to send you an email to ask about this, so sorry, but is it Petrich or Petrick?
Petrich. It's like a compound word. If you
Okay,
can say pet and rich, you've got it.
All right, Petrich. All right, so Miss Marisa Petrich from UW-Tacoma Libraries, and we are going to be talking today about student autonomy and safety and open assignments. Open education, open teaching and learning being dear to my heart, so I'm excited about this. And I'm just going to hand it over to Marisa and Erika to go for it.
Cool. Well, we have thought about this a fair amount. I'm actually going to share a poster we did several years ago. It's one of our very first collaborations too, which is like memory lane. But I think we've thought a lot. We both like working in the open, working with students in the open, working with digital tools and sharing, but think a lot about how to do that in a way that feels good to lots of people who might have different vulnerabilities, different priorities, and different thoughts on what they want to share or what they want to own, how they want to be present in digital spaces. So this is kind of our initial thoughts. Erika, do you want to briefly introduce how you're coming at this topic?
Yeah, I, as Marisa said, just personally love working in the open and with digital tools. And I, as part of my position, work with faculty on incorporating those into their classes or in their own scholarship that might have student collaborators. And I guess that's sort of the context. It's the water we're swimming in. And really trying to be really upfront and transparent about some of the risks of working in open, especially for folks who might already be marginalized at our institution or in our communities, but how we can address them so that those risks don't prevent us from using these tools or engaging in, innovative, modern, exciting, open ways. So, yeah.
I think we've been coming back at this a lot too, thinking particularly about generative AI, as we all are every day. I know many of us are just from campus conversations, and we're noticing a lot of folks thinking about moving away from traditional closed assignments like essays and term papers, and maybe looking more and more at assignments that ask students to demonstrate knowledge in alternative ways, like videos or podcasts or collaborating on websites, doing things where writing is less emphasized in how they show their knowledge, which might ask students to kind of venture outside the classroom. And I know that we love that idea, invite students to share their knowledge and be part of this global landscape of teaching and learning. But, I know I, as a student, I came back and I found that some of my work had been shared publicly after I had graduated, and I was not wild about that. I have to say, it wasn't something that I necessarily would have signed off on. I didn't even know it had happened. So thinking about how to trust people to make the right choices for them and giving them a chance to make informed choices is definitely something that comes up for us a lot, for sure.
Just out of curiosity, Marisa, real quick, in your experience, was this something, so it wasn't open when you did it, but then it was being shared openly afterwards? Wow, yeah, that's
well, it sort of was. It was on a website that was had been taken down after the class had ended. And then was later archived in a different space. And it wasn't a huge deal, but I was, I had been working as a journalist for a while. It was not bad student work, but it was maybe not what I would have wanted folks to find when Googling my name. Not because it was embarrassing, but
yeah.
If they weren't thinking oh, Marisa made this when she was a sophomore in college, and now it's 10 years later. I just didn't know it was out there, and it was.
Yeah.
What we've thought about a lot too is these are fun assignments, and we want to encourage people to do them and experiment with them and try things that are asking students to contribute knowledge, but hopefully we can give folks a sense of how to do this in a way that feels good for everyone involved. And we broke it down into some main risk mitigation strategies, including talking about digital literacy, talking about what it means to use someone else's work and how to attribute it and where you can and can't incorporate it, really respecting people's autonomy and giving them opportunities to make the right choice for them, even if it's not one you agree with, especially keeping in mind that depending on your personal circumstances and your personal identity, being in public might feel different for different folks, and allowing people more protection if they want it, or the ability to opt out if they want it, I think is very important. And also really publicly acknowledging what might be risky or dangerous, especially if you're working with a topic that might be controversial.
Yeah, I think these are really interconnected, as you can guess. And I think that especially when we're, in the sort of title of our talk about autonomy and safety, how much those go together, that when students get to make the choice about how they can engage and feel safe, that also goes into why we do these open assignments anyways, right? The idea is that, like, when your audience is more than just your instructor, you have more engagement, you're excited to produce maybe even a higher caliber work or a different type of work that's like more in a public scholarship type way. But if students feel like they're being asked to be really vulnerable, maybe the assignment is really personal, and then you're like, and we're gonna post it on the internet. That can feel kind of icky for people. And so making sure that there's a way that they can engage of, I can be personal, but I want to limit my audience, or I'm happy to be out in the open, but then the topics I pick might be different. Letting our students do that because they're adults and they get to decide is really important. We have a couple ways that we can support instructors doing that, with like creating project agreement forms, which can also go into that digital literacy piece too, around students picking their own license for the work they create, but also thinking about copyright and licensing and things, and the materials they might incorporate into blog posts, videos, podcasts, visual work that's online.
It sounds like setting the stage is very important so that students understand early on where they're going to be potentially working in the open and not. And then the ongoing education that students understand during, but also long after the process, that they both retain ownership. So make sure you have a system that allows that, and that they know that they can go in and they can make changes or remove things if they'd like later. So you aren't stuck in a position where something, even if you're not embarrassed about, like you said, it's earlier work, it's not necessarily something you want to share. Those seem really important, right? The ongoing education and the setting the stage.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think as university faculty and staff, we really are conscious of our ownership of our intellectual work and our ability to make choices for ourselves, and we should extend those same things to students. I just wanted to point out that there is a really good example of a student agreement form that you can use, created by our colleagues at UW Bothell, that's linked from here, and we can get that link for the chat as well. Yeah, and for benefit of people watching this, there will be links surrounding this video in some way wherever you're seeing it that will link to this agreement and graphics and things like that. So you don't have to take screenshots or anything right now.
We have some discussion questions for y'all, but I'm curious, before we jump in, do you have an idea on these types of projects? Have you done them in your course? Are you thinking of some? Or would it be helpful to look at some examples of projects that we've done at Tacoma or in the bigger UW system for maybe like 1 or 2 minutes?
So Greg, have you had students working out in the open?
I think so. And in fact, that was on my list of questions to ask when it was appropriate. So you folks can tell me. I teach geographic information systems, and one of my constant themes is you're doing this, yes, to learn, but it's probably to get a job. So they build in my 2 advanced classes, GIS 312 and 414, a digital portfolio in which they post versions of their lab assignments, their deliverables from their lab assignments. And they have, so actually, I should just stop there. So that's what I do. So they post their lab assignments, maps, digital maps, results on their portfolio webpage that they can they use after they graduate as part of their resume. So that's what I do. So I don't know where that falls in this whole category.
What tool do they use to create those portfolios?
They use ArcGIS Online, which is an Esri product. They're out of Redlands. It's the GIS online software. And I'm actually pulling it up because I figured there might be a question, so I can show you if you'd like to see, or I can wait until the end.
No, show us.
Show it? Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, I would imagine, and this may not be true, but most tools that allow you to create something publicly allow you to create it not publicly or share it with just 4 people or something. That's not always the case, but frequently it is.
And I think in this case, if that is the case, you could always ask the student, do you want this to be part of the public collection? Or do you want this to be something that you have and you can put in with your job application materials if you want, or not if you don't?
So this is just an example. There's a website sharing assignment where they get points for just putting it there so that they can solicit and provide feedback to their peers in the class. And so this is just one example. It's the first one that I came up with. This is publicly shared. This is called a collection, ArcGIS Online collection. So this was one lab just to build the shell. And then they developed a get to know me page. And I told them to not put their email, not put their address, not put their phone number, but I suggested they use their LinkedIn. So I'm happy to see that Chase only put in his LinkedIn, and then it said that resumes can be collected. So he followed directions. So I'm happy to see that. And then their first 2 labs. So this is lab 1B, they make a map of their home because I teach mapping. So this is what we call a static map, and it talks about where he went to school, his work, and then lab 2, for example, is the impact of flooding on Pierce County infrastructure. So this is a dynamic map that he created in the software that's integrated with the software in which this is created. And it's the way GIS is going, and now somebody can go into one of these dynamic maps, and of course it's not working, but there are pop-ups for which of these routes would be affected by a severe flooding event, blah, blah, blah. So that's the example. I hate to take up too much time, but that's what it would be. And then they do this for every single lab throughout the next 2 quarters.
I think that's an amazing example. And I think it's a really good example of what we're talking about too, where you're inviting students to show their knowledge, contribute to the knowledge around them, and kind of show off their expertise. And I think what we're trying to add to that conversation is giving students options about how public or not they want to be. I once worked with someone who had a pretty serious stalker and didn't want to put anything with her name out there, which would be a very vulnerable thing to share with anyone. Maybe you don't want to share that in class. So these assignments are great. It's just being conscious of the fact that people might have their own reasons for not necessarily wanting to put themselves out there in that way. And how can those students be accommodated? So if a student made a private version of this site, would that still fulfill the terms of your assignment? I think it would. And I don't think it would deter people who are comfortable working in the open from being public and going out there and sharing what they know.
And I am so glad I attended this, because I will admit in front of the six of you and everybody who's watching, I guess, later, it's always been required that it was shared publicly. But I can change that in 5 minutes, and they can select just certain groups, and then I would be able to go in and they can eat this. So they can select publicly our organization, which is everybody in UW-Tacoma, or completely private, but me as the administrator, I can see it. So I could definitely set that up 5 minutes after this this Zoom, to be honest.
It's great to hear too that, you know, how easy it is to make that accommodation that could have such a powerful impact for one of your students. Another one Todd brought up, most tools you have the option, like what you're saying, you know, ArcGIS does let you do that. There are some tools that do not have that option. Let's say you're in a class blog and or like you were having folks like making websites and the web, it doesn't let you see it when it's in draft mode or something. Another way that we can address this that Marisa and I advocate for a lot is giving students the option to use a pseudonym. And so the student could still have their work public, but they can make up a fake name or a pen name, and you know it as the instructor, but that way they can have that added level of privacy.
That's a great idea. I like that.
Or I the options for like a relatively easy accommodation are so many. Like if that wouldn't work for your class, could they build it privately and then do a class presentation? So you still have their sort of public presenting skills being honed, but it's not necessarily on the internet for future employers or former partners or whoever you might be trying to protect some of that information from to see.
I'm so glad you brought up this example because it really covers so much of what we're covering in this session with a real practical example. I just wanted to ask a couple of questions real quickly. With this platform, thinking about the considerations I was mentioning earlier, do students retain access to this system after they graduate or leave, or is it connected to their UW ID? Like, do they have options to change or take it down later or build on it later? That's one question. Yeah, I guess that's the main question right now.
So the short answer is yes, they can carry it on. It's not tied to their uw.edu credentials. It's a separate system outside of the UW, but it's part of our UW-Tacoma Esri license.
Okay.
So it's housed in Tacoma. I'm the administrator of the whole thing for UW-Tacoma, and actually other students in other schools are now using it. Environmental science or SIAS is using some of it, several instructors. So the short answer is yes, they can edit it, delete it after they leave the university, irregardless of whether or not they still have their UW ID.
Awesome. And your proposed changes to accommodate, a pseudonym or private and presentations, that's definitely a change. That's great that you're going to make it because you don't want to run afoul of FERPA and other legal considerations as well. So that's
absolutely. Yep. And I love I'm thinking I'm going to give them the pseudonym option and keep it public. And then let's say they apply for a job at Department of Ecology, turn it on for a little bit, let Department of Ecology look at it perhaps, and then turn it right off, or change their name to their real name and turn it off. But I can definitely make those accommodations immediately.
I think another thing that both Eric and I really like to talk about with students is open licensing and sort of the spectrum of Creative Commons licenses, because I think it's a really good way to teach folks about not only how they can share their work, but how they can use other people's works freely and in a way that's respectful and, co-signed by the author. If they want to adapt something they see on the internet or incorporate it later, they start learning about how they can contribute and take from those communities in ways that are intentional and well thought out. Do we have, Erika, did we plan for anything that shows what
I
Creative Commons
do
licenses
have
are?
one. Actually, I was so glad you brought that up because I was just gonna bring it up right now. So this is a site. It uses a template called a Splot. It's Devon Woodard and Urban Studies does this for Tier 316. It's the Tacoma Belonging Project. And when he invites me to come to the class and kind of introduce like working in WordPress, and we talk about open licenses with the students, and we do this kind of game session where we show different pictures and then the students sort of say what license they would give it if they had taken it, and then guess like what the license is for it. But then ultimately when they create something, you can see they have like these images, and then they write essays. At the bottom, they do get to assign a license. So you can see here, this student used a CC BY license for their work. And there's some students who, you know, CC BY is a very open license. And there are some students who they put in a lot of time and effort, or maybe it's like extremely personal or it has video, and they'll choose a little bit more, CC BY essay, or something a little bit more restrictive. But they're all Creative Commons licenses. So, and they, as part of the project and the format, they get to pick it. And like the student chose to put it in the public domain. So extremely open, which is always cool to see what they choose. They're generally, I think students are more willing to have an open license than I anticipated. They'll choose, which is cool.
If you're not familiar with open licenses, they basically invite the creator of content to tell other people how they may or may not use their work. So in theory, if you're reserving all of your rights under copyright, other people can't share it, they can't edit it, they can't make a copy of it and send that PDF to their mom or whatever. But you as a creator might say, like, actually, I'm okay with you sharing this as widely as you want. I'm okay with you incorporating it into your own work. If you want to use some of the images I've created in a new or different way, that's fine with me. These agreements give students the option to not only share their work publicly, but invite other people to share and use their work in different and creative ways. And I think by making them aware of those licensing options, they're also more aware of how they interact with the internet and how they may use and share the work of other people.
Which really helps because you don't have to understand the weirdness and limitations of fair use to try to do something. And for those who proactively share, you feed into an ecosystem of sharing, which I think can be great. And these licenses run the gamut from, CC0, basically it's public domain, you can do whatever you want, to some fairly restrictive license, like you can't make changes to it, but you can share it, things like that. And yeah, we'll link to, Erika shared a great link, and we'll link to some more materials as well along with this video. But I definitely think if you're not considering and educating students about using CC licenses right now, Creative Commons license, that's a great next step for open work, I would say.
Another nice thing about Creative Commons licenses when you're working open in digital projects is that they are machine readable. So it can help make the work that you're creating more discoverable, because it'll be fed into some of those systems, and it'll also help, prevent people from using it in the way you are not intending. So that's nice.
Also, I wanted to amplify what Erika said earlier too about how, we don't want this to seem scary, like, oh no, I've been making my students do these terrible things all this time. And, most students actually are pretty happy to share their work openly. I don't think there's any harm in making sure that they do it with the understanding of what they're doing and what their rights are. Giving them the option to have a more restrictive license or a more private experience, just make sure that they're doing these things with informed consent. It doesn't necessarily mean that everyone's going to lock down and say, no, I won't.
It's also just such a great entree to the conversation about sharing and like, why would you want to do this? And what might it mean? Or show examples of something you've shared that's been used somewhere else that really excites you, or that, for me, that's awesome. I love getting an email or something. You don't have to do that, but I love getting an email saying, oh, I used your picture here. I'm like, hey, that's awesome. It's like I took a good photo for once. Greg?
And knowing your options to share sometimes makes people more excited about sharing and being generous with their work. Greg?
So this brings up a semi-related question. Students in my courses learn so much from the collaborative experience of sharing their work and discussing it and offering suggestions for improvement, or, hey, I really like that. How did you do it? Quite literally, I had a student this week on Monday just say, who was able to make that work? And a couple people mentioned it as we were going through these websites. And he said, could you just spend 5 minutes with me to show me, because I just got stuck here. But now I'm rethinking that, is me sharing and talking about these websites in front of the classroom violating their FERPA rights? No. Okay. As long as I'm not talking about grades and that type of thing, right? Whew. Okay. Thank you.
I think there can be a lot of fear around FERPA, especially there's something about when you move into an online platform, which is probably, it's okay to have some healthy fear, but your example is great because you're like, we would never question having a class discussion, and you peer review each other's work, and those are things that are accepted educational practices. But in the same way, you wouldn't like pass around the students' papers with your grade on them for them to then peer review. That's where you wouldn't want to like publicly comment on their maps and say like, Professor Lund here, great job, B+, that's like publicly visible. You'll want to keep that stuff in campus. And yeah.
I thought so, but now that I realized that my required sharing was probably a faux pas, I just wanted to ask. So thank you.
I actually think like people who are feeling concerned about this, like when Eric and I talk about this, we really just want to make sure that that concern doesn't stop folks. It's probably good that people are thinking about those things, because it does make you make these choices to be like, oh, I should think about how other people might feel about that. But if you are thinking about it, it's probably a good sign that you're not running rampant and like wreaking havoc and causing harm.
Yeah, it's not a faux pas. I think it's just part of the learning process of how to do this, and you can continue evolving your kind of pedagogical approaches using the benefits of open teaching and learning, and I think that's a great thing. So yeah, don't feel that that's bad.
Okay. Thank you.
Something had come to my mind as you were talking also, Greg. Oh, it was about that public sharing thing. I mean, a good example of this can happen if you're doing videos for students that you want to make public on part of the public process or something, which some faculty do, which is a great thing. That's where you also just have to be concerned where you're not kind of leaking student information in a way you don't want to. And it came up in a funny way in one of these sessions where a faculty member was very excellently and graciously sharing from their students' work with the group in the session. But then when I wanted to make this public, I had to go through and blur out all of that information, which was truly a painful process with video, as you might have experienced, because that's something you don't want to share publicly, right? So you just don't want to incidentally share things of that nature, like assessments, essentially, and other student information. Did you have contributions or thoughts, Todd, on working in the open, work that you've done? Since I know you've done a lot of it, so contain yourself, but what do you think about some of these?
Well, I just first, Greg, I just gotta applaud your effort toward using something that you must have looked at some point and gone, wow, that's really a great way to express something, your understanding of maps, right? And oh, look, it's out there like where I can see it. I didn't even make it, but I could see it. And maybe if I made one or students made one, they could share those, like that. Your initial thoughts around however you discovered that was possible. I would definitely say don't ever, I mean, that kind of optimism and hope and in a way like fearlessness is so important, like I would say, keep that moving, and don't, I don't know. It's a little bit of understanding is great, but when it turns into fear, it just really gets detrimental, I think, to the learning experience, because a lot of things we learn are things we don't know and have anxieties and fear about. So that's a good path to be on, to me. So good for you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
I'll give you a funny example of fear. I used to get paid money to stand and look at students in the eyes as they walked backwards off of cliffs. If any of you have been rappelling, you know that once you're over the edge, everything's mostly good, because if anything happens, you're just going to be a goner. But it's those steps that you actually take initially on the edge backwards that are super scary, right? And so what I always found was so interesting was those moments could make or break people from doing it again. Like, people would be so scared they'd never do it again. You don't want that. You want them to feel supported. You want them to feel capable and confident in what they're doing, but they need to be scared, because that's healthy in that space. But, I did a lot of weird things on mountain bikes and backpacking in the Grand Canyon with students, and I always felt like there's just an amazing line that's kind of just on the dangerous side of life, that's where the amazing things are. If you kind of get on the other side, you get too afraid and you might not do it again, And so when you mentioned risk assessment, and I think that's a fascinating topic. I really don't know anything about it, but I think it's important in learning to be in that space or wonder about that.
I think there's so much of finding that kind of hair-raising, thrilling, formative life experience, the areas where you really push yourself. A lot of that has to do with knowing yourself and where you are as well, too. So, I mean, yeah, I think there's a ton of learning to be had on that other side of fear, but you don't know where a person started or where their fears are or how far is too far. And so I think there has to be kind of radical trust in each other, right? Like, you hope that students will trust that you're not asking them to do anything that you think would really hurt them. But also, I think we have to trust other people if they say, hey, this isn't where I am right now, maybe I'll try it again another time, to say, you know where you are and you know yourself and you know your reasons. If you want to try it again another time, we'll do that.
Yeah, I agree totally. I mean, the person, once they get to bawling their eyes out as they're walking backwards, it gets pretty weird. Like, maybe we should wait a little bit, but that's the, yeah. Greg, one thing that interests me is, did you make one of those sites with some of those examples prior to asking your students to do it?
I did.
Okay.
I made some as examples, and now I use previous student years as examples.
Nice.
And the quality is consistently risen every year. And I talk to them, these are, as much as it may hurt, these are the people you're competing with for jobs. And it raises the bar quite a bit. And the great thing is, what I showed you, all 40 students had the same exact assignment, the same exact lab directions, yet all of their deliverables are going to be extremely different. And that's why I tell the students not to call these labs, call them analyses, because yes, they did the analysis the same, but their creative output is just, they're all different. And that's the beauty of it. We'll go through these in class and look at every single one and talk about them. And they don't look the same at all. They have the same information, but they're just, the way they're presented is just, the creative side comes out.
Yeah, I think that trust initially can come from, like, here's what I do. here, watch me do this first, right? I did a lot of mountain biking with students, and I always had to go down the hill first, right? And if I could do it, surely the 18-year-old dude could do it, or whatever, like so. Yeah, being able to know that environment and show them that it's safe and it's okay. That can start building that trust.
I just want to note for the video, I did not pay Greg to come in and talk about any of this way. It's awesome. So I did want to just follow quickly on what you said about the different products or different things they made, which that's one of the things I love about working in the open is that you have access to so many different options for creating different things, because then students have more ability to capitalize on their own creative inspiration, their own ways to work. So it just opens the manifold. I mean, Canvas is great for what it does, but it's a pretty limiting platform in a lot of ways. So being able to expand beyond that is awesome. So what you're doing with ArcGIS, what people do with blogs that we've heard, what we've seen in other sessions here around Pressbooks, and there are just so many. You start listing them, I'd go on forever. So I just love seeing that creativity being able to have an outlet. And it can happen in courses across the disciplinary spectrums. Amazing things coming out of STEM classes, humanities classes, whatever. It's all over. Oh, hey, Sarita.
Hey, Chris, I have been so interested in this topic in this conversation, but I had class. I'm sorry I'm late, but I would love to participate. And first, I'll just start by listening, maybe.
I mean, if it's okay with Marisa and Erika, I can tell you that we've just been talking about lots of things, but one of them is, have you had students working out in the open? And would you like to share your experience, maybe, what led you to it and what happened?
So my students in one of my classes have been doing this work. So I started, I think, Todd is here. And so teaching learning on the open web learning community was sort of one of the reasons why I got very interested in this work. Really thinking about, what else could students do? How could they share some of the learning that might be helpful for folks outside of our teaching learning, just our tiny classroom space. And it's actually been going really well. This quarter too, students did this work, and I'll share the blog site link with you all here. But I've had a lot of positive responses from students. Maybe I can copy some of the discussion post comments that they've made about participating in this activity. They just finished that actually on the 14th. And it's just wonderful to hear them grapple with critically thinking about doing work in the open. What does it mean to do that work? And it's been good, but at the same time, it's been a bit challenging for some students too, and then for me as well. Sort of, how do I make sure that it's not required that you participate in this space? It is not the case that you have to just post here. You can do a Canvas assignment too if you want to. So allowing for that flexibility, and then for students to take ownership of their work has been fun. One question that I have is about sort of, should I have students do sort of like a Creative Commons license to their own post? I have not done that yet. That's something that I would like to extend to, but there's a lot that I want to learn about, even in terms of my own safety as a faculty person. Doing this kind of work, things can go, it can go in multiple directions, right? So my own safety, student safety, and so yes, I'm here to listen and then also ask questions too. I really appreciate you all conducting this today.
That sounds fantastic. There are some slides. I'll see if I can dig them up. I did not queue them up right away, but there's some openly licensed slides about teaching students to select their own licenses that might be interesting to you. I'll try to get those before Chris makes the page of the video and all the links that is so helpful. But another useful thing is maybe thinking about platform, like Pressbooks, for example, allows different licenses. It's like really easy to select a different license for a different chapter or a different part of the book so that students can make their own choices for how they want to license their work.
Yeah, and I know just because I'm familiar with your project, that the Splot that you're using also does have the ability to do that too. So you're technically I think set up to do that. And so some of those classroom, maybe more instructional options of talking with students would be the biggest step in incorporating that into the practice.
That is a really important platform consideration, I think. So it's great to be talking about that. Where can you, in a more granular fashion, use licensing or not? Because some platforms don't have easy ways to do that. So you're copying and pasting all the time. So just trying to remember to do that, that can be a bit of a problem. I'm curious, Sarita, if you could expand a little on kind of students. So we've talked a little bit before you were here, and you can see it on the recording about students' reluctance providing accommodation. Like, what have you run into when it comes to students feeling safe and to work online or running into vulnerability? And then also for yourself, because I'm really curious about that. We haven't really talked about instructor safety and autonomy.
Thank you, Chris. So I think that for me, the big thing is that I'm not doing this alone. I have library colleagues with whom I've partnered. And then, for instance, the teaching learning on the open web is another space where I ask questions. Todd knows I'll come to him with questions like, Todd, help me. But then likewise, Denise Hatwig and Alyssa Berger, they've been really important in this work that I've done too. They set up quizzes for my class. And those quizzes essentially introduce students to the idea of doing open work. And then the second quiz that they have created is about critically analyzing online sources. So while I do not have any points attached to those two quizzes, I mandate students to do that. Like, if you do not do this, then you cannot do this, essentially. And it sets them up to think about what open student work is before they can actually do this project. And then Alyssa came in and she spent an entire class session just talking about what does it look like to critically analyze a source. And then students then got to do that work during the class meeting and ask questions in real time of Alyssa and me. About doing that work. So I think setting it up that way has helped sort of like reduce sort of like student the sense of vulnerability. And there are multiple students have had, I'd say, a sixth of the class that has chosen not to post either on the site or has gone in for the anonymous option. And I respect that. If students go in for the anonymous name, I ask them to share their name, or I give them a name that they can use for the post. They still earn credit for doing the work. So there's that piece to it. I think for me, it's a lot of learning as you're going, because questions come up. So for instance, how do you cite open images? What kind of images can you find online and are okay to use? There are all those questions that I don't think that I'm still trying to learn as I'm doing this work too. But then I'll share what I know.
I still feel vulnerable putting my stuff in the open sometimes.
Yeah.
I mean, I still do it, but I think most of us, you do feel that little tinge of like a little bit of fear when you're going for that. I don't think it necessarily means that you should not do it, but that's up to you.
Yeah, it's almost like a signal to me. That little twinge means I'm probably doing something good, but I also have to overcome that, because if it's rote, what does that necessarily mean? But it is a process, right? And you're coming to it as you do it. So I was just really curious about the instructor part of it. Also because, your students probably feel that many times over for almost everything that they contribute, because it generally is going to be newer to them and higher stakes for them in many ways at the moment. We have about 9 minutes left. I always want to be cognizant of time. I want to ask Marisa and Erika maybe to give us, and the people in the future who are watching this, I mean, this may look like a stone tablet to them at some point, but if you're still in the proximal zone of where we're at, you can, what we need to do. But before we get to that, what next, I just want to see if Greg or Todd or Sarita have any further comments on the excitement of working in the open, why work in the open, concerns, what you've experienced, anything to share with future folks and us.
I'm just very careful, very thankful for the conversation and what I've already learned and how I can make my changes to get me back into what it should be, allowing the students to choose and whatnot. So I'm just so thankful.
Well, I'm excited, Greg, because I know that you've learned some new things here. But bottom line is you're working at a level that many faculty are still aspiring to or trying to figure out how to get to. So you're an exemplar to me. I mean, I'm going to share the links to your students' open work as examples, because it's out there. It's a good thing. It's exciting. So you're doing great stuff that way. Sometimes as we get wrapped up in this, it can be easy to feel like there's so much we don't know and there's so many things we're not sure about. Are we doing it right? And but you're doing incredible work with that. So I'm grateful for that. And Sarita too. I've seen Sarita's work in the UW open web group. So that's awesome. I hadn't seen this site yet though. So I'm pretty stoked about that.
I also think so much of this is about evolving practice, right? I don't think anyone is doing any of this work the way they were doing it 2 years ago, 4 years ago, 6 years ago. It's okay to evolve and change over time as you think about things differently and consider new options.
An hour ago, 30 minutes ago.
Yeah.
I just was at a presentation last night where I discovered the site I just put in chat there. I feel like I'm sort of in the know here with the people doing work on the open and this and that. This is by a faculty member I do know, but not well. But the guy's been doing this for a long time, And so I think that, as we connect like this or find relationships with people in the same boat, right? This is going to make us feel better and more encouraged about what we're doing and why we're doing.
I would kind of hate to be part of anything that expected everyone to do it 100% perfectly the first time and never change anything for the rest of their life. That, I feel like that's the kind of fear that stops people from growing in good ways.
I think too, it's one of the things that makes working openly in our scholarship or pedagogy really, in some ways, kind of subversive and radical, because when we go through a traditional publication or peer review process in which all the iteration has happened secretly and you don't get to see it, it gives this sort of false sense of I just pulled it out of my brain and here it is. And I think when we work openly, and whether it's through open peer review process or archiving our preprints and things, or assignments and syllabi online, it demonstrates the process and the collaboration and the iteration that helps everyone so much more. It's very cool. But takes more vulnerability.
Yeah, I think if you can't tell, we're pretty excited about working out in the open and open teaching and learning and open pedagogy. And this is we've had other sessions, another with Marisa, and we'll hopefully have more certainly will on this topic. But before we close up at 1:30, and I can certainly stay a few minutes later if anybody wants to. So what do we do now? We're excited about this. We've seen this. We're inspired. We're raring to go. Or we've been to working in the open, and now we're suddenly realizing there's a whole new level to aspire to. What do we do at University of Washington, or as generally instructors, or University of Washington Tacoma specifically?
My bullet point for excited move forward is meet with us, smiley face. And Sarita gave such a good example of collaborating with the folks at the UW Library. Marisa and I love collaborating with folks. Chris loves collaborating with people. And so I think, these groups already are, we're starting down the road because we're connecting with each other. But I think getting to ask some of those questions, at the beginning, we said a lot of this around sort of creating a sense of safety and respecting student autonomy and assignments is in the work you do before the class starts. I think finding someone who you can talk to about that at that point is really helpful.
Making connections is so important. I mean, I tend to be a person who wants to read up on stuff and try to do it all myself. And it's not necessarily the most, not just the optimal, it's not the richest way to go. So making connections, people in this group, I mean, I'm confident that Todd and Sarita and Greg would be happy to receive an email asking more questions or wanting to talk. We certainly are. So yeah, reach out and make connections for sure.
I'm gonna, now that you mention it, and remind me of this because I have to go right now, but Greg and Erika, I think I'm going to send you invites to a group that Chris and Sarita and Marisa are in, but it's been around for 7 years. And we talk about this every month. So I'll invite you. You can come if you want, but I got to go.
And get some great guest speakers there too. So
that's right.
Great. Thank you.
Marisa, I think you were wanting to add to the what to do next item.
Yeah, I mean, I changed my what to do next in this hour, I think. Initially, I was like, start small, right? You don't have to redo your whole course or your entire practice at once. But now I feel like the next step and like the constant step for everyone is don't feel like where you started is where you have to end. Like just keep seeking those opportunities for growth, big or little, and don't feel like change means anything negative about your previous work. I don't think it does. So like if there's anything about, this turned into a conversation about fear and I kind of liked it, and not letting fear stop you.
Yeah, I think it's excellent. I love having this kind of conversation because it's just so important. And yeah, it's never, I mean, failures happen, right? I mean, and failure in this context just means something doesn't work as well as you wanted it to. Something didn't take off. Students had problems. I've looked like a fool in front of classes virtually and not so many times because people ask a question I'd never thought of about something, or I'm using a piece of software that I've not used much before to help them, whatever the case might be. So it's okay. Like that's part of the process, I feel like, at least for me, constantly, maybe much more so than it would be for most normal folks pursuing these paths.
I also feel that there is something else that we want to address in terms of time. So as an instructor, you're juggling between content and pedagogy. And this sort of falls in pedagogy realm too, like how do we teach and learn, which I think has been which takes a lot of time to think through it very carefully. But then content-wise, how do I, spend time doing that? And then the pedagogy part of things too. So some ways in which maybe there is more ease of access about what else is happening currently, and that, you do not have to just always go, have to go out and go, okay, I know that there's always new iterations to things, right? I did not think about the part that you both mentioned, I think Erika and Marisa, that we could add the Creative Commons licensing. I still don't do that. I think I need to make that a practice for work that I share, that it's something that can be embedded, I think you said, in the site. So there are things that you do not know when you start this work. So ways in which you can learn about that too. I don't know what those spaces would be, or maybe having occasions where you could talk about what's happening. Like, I don't know. So that's what I've been struggling with, content and then pedagogy, and how do I spend, a lot more time in this space too.
I mean, the eternal challenge I know I'm sure for Marisa and Erika as it is for me, is figuring out how to get people together to have these kinds of conversations and to have more of them after we establish a foundation, and then the individual processes of design that are going to be specific to things that you're doing. Because it's the unknown unknowns as well, right? Like we don't even know there's a thing that could make our life easier or better until we learn it from someone. And then, that's what the UW Open Group tries to help with too. But it's just, I don't know, I've not found a good answer in my 25 years doing this. It's just many, many imperfect answers.
You're telling me there's not like a magic hour of the day we haven't found that we're all free to meet and talk about it?
I was hoping there would be something from you two. What's happening here? What did you get paid $0 for this to give? Come on.
I don't know. If I had a magic hour, it would be hard to be like, I might need several magic hours. Some to keep, some to share. How about that?
Fair. It is 1:32, so I just want to kind of formally end the session as far as recording goes, and this will be available in various places.